Going. So happy Monday. And so today we had a break for Columbus Day. And so now we're going to pick up on the fourth part of the making contact with the future and kind of pulling it all together and kind of covering, what we talked about in the first three parts and, trying to bring all the concepts together and tie this off so we can move on to our next topic next Monday. So in pulling it all together, so we've started every part, the first three parts with this slide, right? Making contact with the future is about being open and aware to possible new and better outcomes because they already exist, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about quantum physics and the observer effect in the end. So I'm going to give you a little bit of new stuff as a precursor to what we'll talk about next week. But for right now, right, we understand that the future is not fixed and that all outcomes that we want already exist. It's really up to us just to be aware of that. So we talked about synchronicities. And we actually talked about synchronicities before we did the contact with the future sessions. But I thought it'd be worthwhile just to bring that back up. And synchronicities are a string of events that seem highly symbolic and meaningful in their nature. And so Carl Jung, first defined synchronicities in the 20s as simultaneous occurrences of two meaningful but not causally connected events, right? So synchronicities can be a lot of different things, and we all experience them. They can take forms of numbers, names, seeing some things more than once, seeing repeated themes or cycles. That's like a whole nother topic. But basically, they're things that get your attention. And I think that's the most important part about synchronicities is, you can look at it and you can say, yeah, there's a little mysticism to it or a little esoterica to it. But generally, though, it's really about what gets your attention. You see something multiple times, then that's when you really want to pay attention to it. And it's not necessarily that, we're all kind of programmed to this. Oh, yeah, just like, oh, what a coincidence. Ha, ha, ha. I just saw this 3 times in a row. No, it doesn't work that way. Something's trying to get your attention. So that's what's important about synchronicities and matching synchronicities to what you see or what you want your future to be. And how do you make contact with what that future is? So we ended last week talking about how to follow the messages that you get and how you follow them to get to what future outcomes you want. And so I just wanted to go over these before we go through the rest of the slides. So the law of threes, I just mentioned that in synchronicities. The law of threes, you see something, hear something, experience something 3 times, you have to act on it, okay? Once gets your attention, twice you're curious, 3, I got it, right? You move on 3. When you hear and feel a message that resonates with you, you need to believe it. Okay. No one's ever going to say to you, oh, and by the way, take a left-hand turn because your future's right there. Right. Right. But what you're going to get is something that resonates with you. And that's what you're looking for, is that resonance. And know the difference between what you desire or kind of conjure up versus what you're being called to. And I think probably the easier way to look at that is there's a difference between what we would like to have happen and the truth. Sometimes they're the same, not always though. And it's being able to discern the difference between the truth and what we want. And you really do that by operating without judgment. So when something happens, to the extent we can, right, we want to look at it. We want to say, well, okay, look, I'm going to look at this situation without judgment. I'm just going to accept it for what it is and then learn what I can, learn what I can from it. Next, trust the message, even if it's counter to conventional thinking or your peer group. So one of the hardest things about change and one of the hardest things about finding your future, okay, is listening to everybody else. because everybody else comes at things, or they come at us, okay? And it's very unintentional, but they come at us from their viewpoint, not necessarily your viewpoint. And so, I have this example I've used about, like, let's say you want to go do yoga, but in your peer group, you're the only one that does yoga. And then you have a friend that says, oh, geez, why are you doing that? Well, that reaction isn't about you doing yoga. It's about this person's view about whether or not he or she could do yoga. Okay. And then that gets in all sorts of reasons. Maybe they don't like crowds. Maybe they don't like, maybe they don't think they're physically fit enough, or whatever the issue may be. Right. And so it's about following, following what's resonating with you, regardless of your peer or social group. Because what will happen is that you will have, and we've all experienced this, right? I always say that life as an adult is more like being in high school than it is being in college. Okay. So I always told my girls that so you have a certain peer group, could be family, could be work, it could be anything. Okay. And that peer group is in a certain position. But then all of a sudden, you're like, well, I want to go do this. What does that peer group do, right? As you start to break orbit from that peer group, they reach and they bring you back down to where they are. Okay. Now, part of that is simply because they don't want to change. So, breaking, it's called, when a spacecraft breaks Earth's orbit, it's called terminal velocity. So a lot of times you really have to break terminal velocity outside of your own peer group, or what might be accepted within your peer group or your family. Families can be that way, right? They don't do it. No one does this stuff intentionally, but it's just a natural reaction. So just be aware of that, right? That it takes courage to get outside of the conventional thinking, because what that means is that you're going to get some feedback that's contrary to the direction you're going in. It has nothing to do with your direction. It has to do with how other people's point of view and how they think your direction affects them. You move with intention and an open heart. Feel your way into it. Okay. So much of, directing ourselves and following, following, where we want to be, or getting out of where we are, is kind of feeling your way through it, feeling your way into it. It's funny. It's like writer's block, or people who are creative. When you have to sit down and create a project, or you have a project that requires creativity, it's pretty hard, right? Sometimes, like, I'm looking at Lorraine and Chrissy and Melissa's in the next room, right, from the marketing department. It's pretty hard. Ready? 1, 2, 3, create, right? Or like writer's block. Well, blocking out 3 hours to write. Well, if I don't feel like it, okay, if I'm not moved by it, it's pretty hard to do it, right? And so feel your way into where you're going, and don't rush. The next one's don't rush. Okay. You don't, change has no clock. We're going to talk about time towards the end here. Okay. Don't rush. All right. Don't rush your way through it. Keep listening for additional guidance. That's about, talks, really about your heart, about feeling your way into it. Keep your eye out for markers. We've talked about markers before. As you're heading in a certain direction, something will resonate with you to, maybe deviate a little bit over here, or go faster here, or slow down, or take a 90-degree turn, whatever the case may be. Listen to those, pay attention to them, and then adjust and keep moving. It's all about adjusting and moving, right? You keep moving forward, and you keep making adjustments along the way. So we also talked about the Hermetic principles, and I hope you had some time to look at these. But we talked about two in particular. One is vibration, that nothing ever rests, everything that moves, and cause and effect. Okay, cause and effect is that there is always that nothing's a mistake and nothing's a coincidence. Everything always happens for a reason. That's what cause and effect is. And vibration is that everything is in a constant state of change all the time. Everything, it doesn't matter what it is. Okay, could be a glacier, right? Well, give it a million years or so, right? And the glacier changes. But it doesn't matter what it is. Everything is in a constant state of movement. And because everything's in a constant state of movement, we always have to be thinking about how do we create room, okay, for the new by eliminating the old. Now, I I think it's important here though to acknowledge that when we move from old space to new space, okay, we want to be grateful for the space we're leaving because there's space we're leaving, okay, whatever it is. It could be a house, could be relationship, it could be a job, it could be a way of thinking, you know, because thinking is space, right? We have to make room in our brains and in our thought process for new thought process. So it really doesn't matter what it is. It's physical, non-physical. But when we make room for things and we've moved on, or we need to move on, we'll take some of it with us, no doubt. Okay. Some we won't, though. Some part of it we won't take with us. But the foundation of where we're leaving, what we're leaving is our foundation. And so we go through a series of setting foundations. It's how we move from one place to another. And so we want to be grateful for where we're leaving. So it isn't like, oh, that old stuff, I can't believe I did that, right? I mean, we all say that a little bit, right? But the reality of it is you couldn't be where you are today if not for that. And so as we make room for the new, okay, we're thankful and grateful to the old and say that, right? I'm grateful for this experience, right? Even the ones maybe that we could have maybe done without, we think. But um, the things that are difficult present equal or greater opportunity on the other end of them. Equal or greater opportunity. So as we make room for the new, we're thankful for the old. And it's our thoughts are that way. And when for us to change our thinking, we can remember how we used to think, but we have to be able to make room for new ideas, right? Because we don't make room for those ideas. It's not a matter of keeping all the old ideas plus all the new ideas, right? You have to like swap them out. You might be able to look back and say, well, I used to look at it like this. That's fine. And how you used to look at it was great because I always believe that you're perfect in the moment you make a decision because you've made the decision based on what you know. That's your knowledge base. So you can look back on our lives, right? We can look back and say, oh, wish I made another decision. Well, how can you do that? You didn't have all the information you have today. So you're perfect in that moment. So when we make room for other things, we're going to be grateful about the information that we had at the time, because we were perfect in that moment. Right? And now I got new information, and we're going to make room for new information, new ideas, and we're going to move on. So that's about making space for the new. It's not about throwing out the old. It's about being grateful, thanking the old, and bringing in the new space or new ideas. So we talked about Einstein and the intuitive mind, and right, we talked about Einstein being a hard sciences guy. He liked physics. He liked traditional physics because everything was defined. But later in his life, right, he admitted, and you can see this quote, right, that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. Now, he was a rational mind, right? Physics is about rational thinking. And he acknowledged the fact that we created a society that honors more the rational mind and less of the intuitive mind. I think that's kind of fascinating for somebody like that, right? So intuition, the rational mind will only get us so far, right? You can't you can't use math to intuit yourself to a different location. Okay, you can't use math or science to intuit yourself to a better outcome. Okay, it can inform you, all right, but it's not creative by its nature. It's more fixed. It defines things. And so like I said, I love that quote from him because I think it reveals, the fact that he looked at things maybe differently than how maybe our school books would teach us that how he looked at things, being from a science background. He recognized that the intuitive mind is where it's at, not hard sciences and even history and things like that. It's the intuition. And so our intuition, how do we know to follow it? It's really through resonance. And we talked about tuning forks and everything. And we then talk about the Hermetic principles of vibration, right? So everything has a resonance to it. And it's a little bit like when you start off to do something and it just doesn't feel right. And you really can't quite put your finger on it, but it doesn't feel right. That's the sign that you're not in resonance. And the inverse is true. You don't have any reason to base it on, but this feels really good. I feel in right relationship to this. And that's resonance, right? Resonance works north and south. It works for maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. This feels good, this doesn't feel good, right? And that's what you have to follow. And resonance is such a funny thing because no one's going to shoot you an email and said, oh, and by the way, here's your resonance, right? Yep, you're in resonance now, go ahead. It doesn't work that way. It's the intuition, like what Einstein was talking about, the gift of intuition. And it's really reinforced by resonance. And then you have to have the confidence to follow the resonance and forget what everybody else says, right? I always liked Edison's quote about how he made the incandescent light bulb. It took him 1,000 tries, and he just said, "Well, I just figured out 1,000 steps on how not to do it." But don't you think at 500 people in his laboratory were like, "Hey man, Thomas, you going to give this thing up or what? Like what's going on here?" But it resonated with him to keep going, right? And so that's that's how people. That's how you move through events, is that you keep following that resonance, even in that intuition, that feeling, even in opposition to what the your peer group, right, might be giving you information on or signaling to. So think about things with resonance. When you get that feeling, ooh, this feels good, I'm going to go in this direction. There's a difference between the feeling that this is going to feel good for about 15 minutes, right? Versus, this feels good in here. That's where the resonance lives. Or it doesn't feel good in here, right? That's where resonance is. And if you follow that and you look at yourself as a tuning fork to future outcomes and vibration, then you'll be heading in the right path. And it's a constant process. You're constantly pinging the tuning fork. We also talked about Rumi, who was a Sufi poet and theologian and scholar. And so when you talk about the resonance, there's always that little voice, and I love this quote, right? There's a voice that doesn't use words, listen. And if you think about it, we all get all the time, right? You're having them right now, where you're getting that little feedback. And it's not the voice that says, oh, you can't do that, or it's not that voice. It's not the self-critic voice, right? Put the self-critic voice, that's just part of the ego, right? You can separate that, right? You can put the self-critic voice in a box and just put it on the shelf, right? It's that other voice. It's that other voice that is giving you guidance. And that's what Rumi's talking about here. So it goes along with the intuition, the resonance, the voice, okay? It all flows together. This is you'll know when you're going in the right direction, okay? And the key to it is to listen to it without and separating all the other static around you, the social static. Okay. Now, look, if you decide to get up in the morning and walk naked down, walk naked in downtown, well, that's a problem. Okay. That voice you might not want to listen to. Okay. But you know what I'm talking about, right? It's that voice that is giving you guidance. And a lot of times we don't follow it because we've been socialized not to. We've been socialized to follow, well, here are the norms. This is what we do. In my family, we do this. In my friend group, we do that. At work, we do this, right? And it's really about learning, where you respectfully deviate from that and you kind of follow your own path. And so you follow your intuition, you feel that resonance, and then those voices, right? That little voice will always keep giving you the guidance to move and adjust from. And we talked about why wouldn't you be a believer, right? And we just touched on that. So you wouldn't be a believer because of our social conditioning. And that ranges everything from school to religion to all these types of things, right? Our social conditioning, we've been socialized in the West, really, in the East, not so much, but in the West, a lot of what we talk about here and a lot of, are things that are just commonly accepted in other places and other cultures and societies. But what we've been socialized, conditioned really to believe is really more along the lines about what we would think and Einstein would think, right? Well, the only thing that exists is what I can see and what is definable. And the reality of it is most of what we know and the opportunities we have really are not definable and you can't see them. It's a matter of how we define them and how we follow a pathway to get there. And it's the knowns that that kind of keep us in a certain pathway. And so there's lots of reasons why we wouldn't be a believer. And I think those are the ones that you kind of have to put aside. Now, look, there's certain things that are true. If I jump off a 10-story building, it's going to hurt when I land, okay? Because we have gravity here. That's what we have. So we're not talking about that, right? But we're talking about being able to discern what is social programming, okay, versus what I feel I'm being called to do, what I believe I can do, right? And so there's lots of reasons why we would not believe that the future is open and available and not fixed, because we've been programmed to kind of think it is fixed, and we've been kind of programmed for self-limitation, right? That's kind of how we've been programmed. And so when you get into your intuition and being in resonance where you are, right? Those are things like they don't teach that in school, right? That's not something that even in a philosophy classes, right? They don't necessarily teach that. So lots of reasons why you wouldn't be a believer. And just be aware of what those are. So the observer effect. So this is kind of touching on a little bit of quantum physics. And we might get into that next week. But so there's this thing called the observer effect. And it's the fact that observing a situation, phenomenon changes it. And so once we put our attention on something, okay, it changes the event, it changes the outcome. Once we put our attention on a future in this direction, okay, then we go there, all right, and we actually change the events. And a lot of times in medical experiments or they have to do like these double and triple blind medical tests and all that, because what they found is that the actual intent of the observer will actually change the outcome. So it's a little bit like the placebo effect, right? They'll give somebody a sugar pill and then the real test drug. So when they test drugs, they have to do double and triple blind tests, because what they're testing the drug against is the placebo. I don't know if you know that or not. So they're testing the actual chemical, okay, against the placebo effect. And the placebo effect is that I can heal myself. So basically, if I take, and you hear about this all the time, right? About people have spontaneous healings and all that. But what they test you against, the placebo effect, is that they'll test maybe 20, 30, or 40% of the people will automatically cure themselves because they believe that even though they got a sugar pill, they believe it's the drug that actually is going to make them feel better. Okay. And that's kind of part of the observer effect. They're two different things, the placebo effect and the observer effect, but they come together because it's really about when we observe things and when we can focus on certain outcomes, we actually can make those outcomes materialize. With the observer effect, again, it gets back into that resonance. It gets back into how we can see a future. If we have a feeling, an intuition that I should go do this, and then I direct my attention onto that, okay, then I'll make that happen. And we've all seen that, right? I mean, this isn't woo-woo. Like, we all know, like, this is actually science, okay? Provable, right? Science is about being able to prove things over and over again, right? So the observer effect, once we set our consciousness on something, okay, we make it happen. And this is a little fun thing. I'll just got 2 more slides. Just want to leave you with this about time being an illusion. So now I want you to think about this for a minute, okay? Nowhere in the universe, anywhere, has anybody said we have to be on a 24-hour clock. It could be, why isn't it a 27-hour clock? Or why isn't it a 14-hour clock? Okay. So time in of itself is really a human construct. Really, money is a human construct. Okay. We just construct money. We built it as a way to make bartering easier. But why, instead of dollar bills or quarters, why can't we use, acorns, or like the Indians did, Native Americans did, shells, right? Could be anything. And time is a construct. So, and it's an artificial construct. So there's nothing that says you can or can't do anything in a particular period of time, right? Because time really is an illusion. And we base our time, okay, on our watches, right? Because we have this 24-hour clock. We base time on events and circumstances, right? But it really is an illusion. Now, listen, if I have to go catch a flight to LA and I go to the airport and I miss my flight, that's not an illusion, right? The airports, they run on this time. Okay, if I have a meeting and I don't make it, right, that's a problem. Okay, so we have time, to kind of manage our day to day, but time in of itself really is illusionary. And so change doesn't have a clock. It doesn't know fast or slow. It functions outside of that. We use time to manage our day-to-day happenings, okay? But time in of itself doesn't really mean anything. So when you say, I don't have time for that, okay? Or it's gonna take too long for me to become this, it's an illusion, okay? You can get there as fast as you want based on how you're resonating and how you're focusing on where you wanna go. And time in that way is an illusion. I always think that's a cool thought, right? Like, who says we have a 24-hour clock, right? I mean, well, how come it's not 15 or 22 or some other number, right? And then lastly, I'll leave you this. What we are challenged by is what we're being called to learn and master. There's a reason why when we have a challenge, it's a reason, and we just think about the Hermetic principle of cause and effect. There's a reason why I'm having this, whatever it is, this challenge. I'm having this challenge, okay? Because I'm being called to learn something. And the outcome or the other side of that challenge, right, is of equal or greater benefit than the challenge that I'm having. And so think about that as we're going through change events, and when we're being challenged by things. It's not being challenged so that you can be bothered. It's being challenged so that you can learn, change, grow, and make contact with the future. So good to be with everybody. I didn't check any chats. Let's see what we got here, if anything. I can't see the chat box here. I don't know why. Nice comment from Edie. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, Edie. Yeah, the inner voice. The inner voice is really powerful. Yeah, that whole inner voice piece. You know, we're kind of programmed to dismiss it. Really, if you think about it, you know, we're really kind of programmed. Oh, yeah, don't pay attention to that. And it's really probably the most important thing we can listen to because it's really our intuition, you know, speaking to us about pinging for future. Now it could be big things, it could be small things, it could be, hey, you know, don't forget your gloves. It's cold out, right? Whatever it is, you know, these don't have to be monumental. When you listen though for the small things, then it's a lot easier to hear the big things. So. Yeah, good comment, Chrissy. Yeah, when you're going through hard times, it helps build your empathy for other people. No doubt about it. Yeah, and being able to identify with what other people are going through is a huge it's a huge opportunity to learn, right? Because when you can kind of be somebody else, I mean, you really can't physically be somebody else. You can't really physically feel their pain, but when you make more of an effort to identify with it, you know, you learn a lot, right? Yeah, really excellent point. Yeah, fun stuff. Okay, well, good to be with everybody, and we will be back next Monday, and I think maybe we'll start to get into a little bit of more of the observer effect, the placebo effect. I think some of those things would really be a lot of fun to get into, and you know, kind of a different way of looking at things. So, all right, take care, everybody. Have a wonderful week.